Hello, everyone. Tonight, we begin with a question about the earth beneath your feet, about something hidden, quiet, and waiting. You're standing on a field in central China, surrounded by whispering wind and dust that clings to your sandals. Beneath this soil lies not just stone and silence, but an army. Thousands of warriors frozen in formation, their faces carved with lifelike purpose. You don't know their names, but they are watching you. And behind them, deeper still, is a secret no one dares disturb. Have you ever wondered why the deepest chambers of the Qin Emperor's tomb have never been opened? Join us to explore this dramatic and surprising story now. Before you snuggle into your blanket, hit like on the video and comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's so fun to know who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first step under the evening sky of Xi'an, the air smelling faintly of loess dust and moss-covered stone. Somewhere nearby, a lantern bobs gently in a caretaker's hand, casting soft gold over weathered bricks and shallow ditches. This is no ordinary field. It's a gateway. You close your eyes for a moment and let yourself feel the ground. Imagine this beneath your toes, layered like an ancient cake lie, centuries of sediment bones, pottery shards, and further down, the silent army, your guide. An old man in a blue jacket and straw hat taps the ground with a bamboo stick. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The hush in the air speaks volumes. Even the birds seem to avoid this place after sundown. The field is divided into sections, now each marked by neat wooden signs and strings tied around pegs. These gentle grid lines echo the careful geometry of something else entirely, the layout of the Emperor's underground city. Beneath you stretches a subterranean map of power and paranoia, vast enough to rival his living kingdom above. And then there's the mound. Off to your right, you see it a massive hill rising unnaturally smooth and symmetrical against the horizon. The burial mound, the final resting place of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. But no one has entered it. No archaeologist has pierced its heart. Not yet. Why? The reasons echo like rumors through time. Some say it's because of traps, real mechanical traps, still armed and waiting. Others say it's the mercury, the deadly element said to flow like rivers inside the tomb, preserved by the magic and madness of ancient science. And still others whisper of a curse, a pact sealed with blood, a silence that must not be broken. You draw closer to a trench, one of the first. A sunken rectangle, shallow and neat. Within it, rows of figures stand at attention, life-sized, each one distinct. Eyes forward, hands poised, faces sculpted not with symmetry, but individuality. Some stern, some gentle, some unnervingly human. You crouch at the edge and stare into the past. The figures were never meant to be seen by the living. And yet, here you are. Now imagine holding a brush in your hand centuries ago. You're not a warrior, you're a sculptor. Your job is to give clay soldiers souls or something close. You paint their armor, etch their eyebrows, and give them a posture that reflects the pride of a kingdom unified. But every time you step back, the field of faces seems to move just slightly in the corner of your eye. Too many eyes, too much silence. Historical records, those that remain, tell us Qin Shi Huang was buried with over 8,000 terracotta warriors, 130 chariots, 25 horses, and 150 cavalry horses. The mainstream fact: these weren't just sculptures, they were an empire in miniature, frozen in position to serve their emperor in death as they did in life. But here's a stranger detail. One soldier has a rare hairstyle never worn by warriors, only court dancers. Another holds a weapon meant for rituals, not war. And some horses are slightly too small with stylized legs like theater props. Fringe scholars suggest that some of these figures may not represent real people, but symbolic roles in a metaphysical bureaucracy, part ghost, part god, part paper pusher for the afterlife. Historians still argue whether these irregularities are errors, artistic license, or something more deliberate. You take a slow step forward. The clay beneath your feet doesn't crack, but your imagination does. You begin to see the army, not just as guardians, but as a warning. As if they're standing between you and something behind them. Something even they were told to fear. Your guide clears his throat, barely a whisper. He gestures toward the mound and murmurs, "Still closed." You ask him why. He chuckles, not kindly. It wants to stay closed. There's something in the tone that stops your breath short. Not menace, just certainty. Like someone who's seen a candle blown out too quickly and never lit it again. And now, with the soft sound of distant crickets settling into the weeds, you step back and look once more at the burial mound. It rises like a sleeping beast, unopened, undisturbed. Beneath it lies more than bones. Beneath it is a place where scholars hesitate and machines falter, where the past resists the present, and you haven't even entered the tomb yet. The torchlight fades behind you as you turn toward the heart of the burial complex. You're not just in a tomb field anymore. You're in the shadow of a man who reshaped history with willpower alone. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, the unifier of China, the one whose fear of death burned brighter than his armies ever did. His reign lasted just over a decade, but his legacy has stretched more than 2,000 years. And now, as you follow the outline of stone paths through the dusty earth, you begin to understand why his tomb is more than a resting place. It's a monument to obsession. Let's be honest, building an empire-wide mausoleum sounds excessive. But imagine being raised not to rule, but to dominate. Qin Shi Huang was born Yingzheng in 259 BCE, and from childhood, he was groomed to believe that chaos was the enemy, and control was the only answer. That includes controlling what happens after death. He didn't just want immortality, he demanded it. Imagine this, you're a court official in the year 215 BCE. The emperor sends you to find the elixir of life. You set sail across oceans, hike through forests, even climb mountains rumored to hold secrets in the mist. When you return empty-handed, trembling, and sunburnt, you're not punished. You vanish. Your neighbors speak less the next day. Your house is scrubbed from the city records, and yet some did try. Historical records from Sima Qian mention alchemists and mystics who fed the emperor mercury pills, ironically, a deadly metal to preserve his youth. You can almost picture the glint of mercury under candlelight, rippling like molten silver in a shallow bowl as court magicians whisper promises they know they can't keep. Here's the mainstream fact construction on Qin Shi Huang's tomb. Began as soon as he became king of Qin, when he was only 13 years old. It continued for nearly 4 decades. Hundreds of thousands of workers were conscripted. Some volunteered, most didn't. The project was so vast, it absorbed entire villages, swallowed mountains, and reportedly diverted rivers to build an underground palace for one man. But let's not forget the quirky part. One scroll discovered in a forgotten library references a map made of fish bones that the emperor consulted in private. It was said to point to a gate beneath the northern star, where souls do not age. Historians still argue whether this map was symbolic or part of a larger, lost system of mystical geography the emperor believed in. You trail your fingers along a reconstructed wall, a replica of what archaeologists think the outer perimeter once looked like. It's tall, thick, made of rammed earth and stone. Functional, but austere. Like everything in the emperor's life, it wasn't built for comfort. It was built for permanence. Let's pause here. Picture yourself as one of the artisans. You've been working on the tomb for years. You sleep in a makeshift shelter. Your hands are cracked from carving stone, and you haven't seen your family in 2 winters. One night by the fire, a fellow worker leans close and whispers, "They say he's afraid to die, but more afraid of coming back wrong. That's why it has to be perfect." Every trap, every river, every celestial replica carved above the burial chamber. And now, imagine the emperor visiting the site. You don't look him in the eye, of course. He wears robes of black and jade, his hair coiled into the style of the high courts. He doesn't speak to you, but you hear him speak to his chancellor. "Even if my soul wanders, the kingdom beneath must hold its form." You feel a chill. It's not the wind, it's something else. Maybe the earth shifting, settling, or remembering. Some believe the emperor planned to become a god, literally. That by surrounding himself with metal rivers and cosmic carvings, he could force his soul to cycle, not into oblivion, but into sovereignty again. His tomb wasn't just an escape from death. It was a machine, a divine mechanism, and its key was fear. Your guide returns, Mawson, now walking silently beside you. He points toward a sealed archway. "That led to the inner gates," he mutters. "Never opened." You ask him if he's seen them. "Not I," he says. "But I met one who had." You raise your eyebrows. He went in with a small group, archaeologists, permitted only to document. No digging, no touching. Came out quiet. Wouldn't speak of what he saw, but his hands shook when he lit a cigarette. That was 10 years ago. You reach out and rest your palm against the cool stone. It's smoother than expected, worn by time or by hands long gone. Then quietly, like someone reaching through fog, you begin to feel the story wrapping around you. Not a linear tale, but a coiled one, circular, folded in on itself, like the serpent rings of ancient myths. The emperor feared death, but he feared being forgotten more. That's why the army was made. That's why the vaults are still sealed. Because to open them, truly open them, might break the spell. Here's something no one tells you. In the museum brochures, some scholars have suggested the emperor may have ordered a final statue, a replica of himself placed in the deepest chamber, but not in stone, in bronze, hollow, a vessel perhaps, or a decoy, or a trap. Imagine standing before it alone. What would it say to you if it could speak? Would it thank you for coming, or warn you to leave? You turn away now. The sun has dipped lower, casting long shadows across the trench. The Terracotta Army begins to fade into silhouette, but their presence doesn't fade. It never does. You hear a distant bird cry, then silence again, and somewhere under your feet, the emperor dreams not of peace, but of permanence. You don't plan to become part of history, you just wanted to visit it. But here, in the red dust of Xi'an history, has a way of reaching up and curling around your ankles like vines. It wraps you gently but firmly, whispering you're already part of this. And it all began with a cracked jug. Picture this. The year is 1974, and you are a farmer in Lintung County. It's been a dry spring. Your well is low, and your peach trees need water. So you and your neighbors, 8 in all, start digging. The earth is stubborn, baked by years of sun. You strike rock. Then something harder, stranger, hollow. You lean closer and brush away the soil with your calloused hands. A face emerges, not a skull, a sculpture, a soldier. The clay is cool and stiff beneath your fingers. His expression is still grave, almost annoyed to have been found. You call the others. More faces appear, rows of them. Warriors lined up like they were waiting for a command. Some stare straight ahead, others to the side as if watching for danger that never came. This isn't just pottery. This is something else entirely. It wasn't archaeologists who found the Terracotta Army. It was farmers. And the ground didn't just open gently. It cracked like a secret breaking loose. You follow that story, now replaying the moment you just imagined into the excavation pits of today. The vast halls of Pit 1 stretch before you. It's a warehouse now, with arching steel beams, glass panels, and carefully preserved silence. But beneath the clean museum polish, the air still feels like the first day of discovery. You walk slowly down the side aisle. Rows and rows of terracotta soldiers stand in formation. Infantry in front, officers in back, faces tilted ever so slightly toward the dawn. You squint and look closely. Imagine holding one of their hands, not lifting it, just resting your palm against the clay. It's not cold, not warm, just waiting. The mainstream account is well known. Over 8,000 soldiers have been unearthed so far. 3 main pits, each with distinct roles: archers, cavalry commanders. No two faces are alike. But here's the curious part. The soldiers were once painted. Brilliantly. Vivid reds, purples, greens. The moment they were exposed to air, the colors flaked off, gone in hours. Some call it the tomb's breath, as if the tomb itself resented the interruption. There's more. Some of the weapons found with the warriors' bronze swords, arrowheads, lances were still sharp. Not just sharp, but corrosion-resistant. Modern scientists were baffled. The metal had been treated with a chromium oxide layer, a technique thousands of years ahead of its time. Historians still argue whether this was an intentional form of preservation or a happy accident caused by unique soil chemistry. But even now, the strange technology makes your mind itch. Who knew this? Why? And what else have we not dug up? You round a corner and see a soldier mid-restoration. His body's intact, but his head sits on a pedestal, like an old king remembering his army. His features are serene, even kind. You wonder, was he based on someone real? A general? A friend of the sculptor? Or maybe the sculptor himself? Some researchers believe the artists left hidden messages in the soldier's features. A faint smile on a foot soldier. A tiny scar on a horse's leg. One archer even appears to wink, possibly a flaw in the firing process, or a joke by a tired artisan. You lean closer. Is that a thumbprint? Yes. A thumbprint embedded in the clay. So small, so faint, but undeniably human. For a moment, time collapses. You're no longer in a museum, but on that original dig site in the 70s. The soil smells stronger. The air is thick with questions. You're a farmer again, holding a trowel, blinking through dust, standing in awe before a soldier older than your entire village. What do you feel? Pride, fear, wonder. Your tour guide, today's version, not from your imagined past, interrupts your thoughts gently. The army faces east, he says, pointing. Toward the lands the emperor conquered. Toward his enemies. That makes you pause. Toward his enemies. Did the emperor believe the war would continue after death? Did he expect to keep fighting? Or did he simply want to remind the world, even underground, who had the last word? You tilt your head, imagining the army as it was painted. The banners, the drums, the flare of bright lacquer against armor. And then imagine that army under torchlight facing not the living world, but the dark. And behind them, behind walls not yet breached, lies the emperor himself. Still surrounded, still guarded, still waiting. Back in 1974, when word of the discovery reached Beijing, the government sent experts immediately. Excavations began, teams grew, and the site became a protected treasure. But even now, over 4 decades later, only a fraction has been explored. So much remains buried. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Several Chinese archaeologists have noted strange irregularities in the soil patterns near the main burial mound. Hollow areas, resonant echoes during seismic scans, possibly chambers, possibly traps, but they remain untouched. You walk past a glass case. Inside it is something different, a clay acrobat. Yes, an entertainer. His limbs are curled mid-motion. He wears a theatrical grin. Found near a ceremonial hall, not a battlefield. Why was he buried here? Did Qin Shi Huang think he'd need entertainment in the afterlife? Or was it a form of mockery? One final joke. Scholars don't know. Some laugh. Others refuse to even guess. As you leave the warehouse-alike excavation pit and step outside again, the air feels heavier. Not from pollution, but from history pressing against your skin. You look back over your shoulder at the rows of warriors. They don't wave, they don't blink, but you feel them watching. Not as individuals, but as a single presence. A presence with patience. One more question lingers. If this army was made to protect the emperor's spirit, what exactly were they protecting him from? You sit at the edge of the trench, and the silence here hums like tension pulled taut. The clay warriors, row upon row, stand frozen mid-march, their backs stiff with duty. But what lies beyond them? What haven't you seen? Your guide leans in, voice low. They say what we see now is only the first layer. You glance toward the burial mound rising in the distance. For all its stillness, it radiates unease. It's not the kind of hill you'd picnic on. No wildflowers grow on its slope. Birds avoid it. Even the wind seems to shift when it passes over the top. You follow the path of scattered bricks and approach what appears to be a ruined corridor. Here, local lore and archaeology blur into something more theatrical. You pass through a narrow stone passage, roped off now, and descend into what researchers once called the trap zone. Yes, traps. Have you ever stepped into a hallway knowing it was designed to harm you? The records say Qin Shi Huang ordered deadly protections to be built around his final chamber. Crossbows set to fire when triggered, pressure plates buried in tile, poisoned arrows dipped in mercury sulfide, booby traps that would make any tomb robber rethink their profession. Mainstream historians generally downplay these claims. They call them exaggerations from records of the grand historian Sima Qian's dramatic, if poetic, account of the emperor's tomb. Still, they admit they haven't ruled it out. In fact, early surveys in the 1980s revealed anomalies beneath the mound that may support the trap theories. One ground-penetrating radar scan detected a pattern of small metallic nodes arranged in clusters near what would be the corridor entrances. Some scholars believe these are remnants of automated defense mechanisms. But here's the unsettling bit. No team has ever excavated them. Why? The official line is preservation. Once the mound is opened, it cannot be resealed. The interior, untouched for over 2,000 years, could degrade in minutes from air moisture or light. But there's also the quieter explanation. 1. No one writes on the plaques. Fear. Some fear the traps are still active. Others fear what might be unleashed, not literally, perhaps, but symbolically. If the final sanctum is opened, the emperor is no longer in control. His silence broken, his burial violated, his kingdom unfinished. You pause beneath a slanted beam and imagine a craftsman thousands of years ago kneeling on the same stone, carving grooves into a wall to hold a spring-loaded crossbow. He's tired. He's sweating. He glances over his shoulder. Behind him, a royal inspector watches, arms crossed. Everything must be exact. The trap must work. Because someday someone will try to enter. Someone unworthy. Imagine being that craftsman. Imagine knowing you're building a weapon, not for war, but for history. Imagine you're walking through that final corridor. Your guide whispers now. What would you do? Step on every third tile. Hold your breath as you pass the statues. He chuckles dryly. I wouldn't try it. Not even in daylight. You laugh softly, but you're already picturing it. A long sloped tunnel, unlit, cool, lined with decorative bas-reliefs. The air gets heavier. Then click. Was it a pebble? No. A spring, a wire, a whisper of tension. You duck instinctively, and nothing happens. But something might have. Here's a more grounded fact. In 2002, a chemical analysis of soil samples from the burial mound's base showed extraordinarily high levels of mercury, dozens of times above normal concentrations. This supports the ancient texts that describe rivers and seas of mercury flowing through the underground palace. Scholars still argue whether these readings are caused by natural deposits or human engineering. But the presence is real, lethal. Mercury vapor is toxic. Its presence alone could make long-term excavation impossible. Now, step into the emperor's logic. He feared death. He feared being forgotten. And he feared interruption. What better way to ensure eternal privacy than by flooding your tomb with poison? You pass a display with a diagram, one, that shows a theorized cross-section of the tomb chamber. There are no pictures, only speculative renderings. Above ground, the mound. Below, rooms, walls, defensive zones, traps, treasure vaults. At the deepest center, the throne chamber. The diagram shows winding canals of mercury, carved like actual rivers, symbolic of China's great waterways. The Yellow River, the Yangtze, all surrounding the emperor's coffin, placed like an island in a sea of silver. It wasn't just defense. It was control over the cosmos. Now lean closer and imagine that scene. You're standing in the tomb's core, torch flickering. A black lacquered coffin rests at the center of a domed room. The ceiling above is studded with pearls and gemstones representing stars and constellations. Below your feet, faint grooves in the stone mark where mercury once flowed. Not a grave, a map. Qin Shi Huang intended his tomb to replicate the entire kingdom. Not symbolically, but spatially. Palaces, towers, pavilions. The rivers, the sky. He would rule again in miniature. This is where fringe scholars get bold. Some say the tomb isn't just ceremonial, it's interactive. That the mercury was circulated through channels possibly by heat or steam to animate the structure. Like blood through veins, a kind of artificial life, an engineered afterlife. It sounds absurd until you remember the chromium-treated weapons, the trap mechanisms, the scale of labor. And now, you ask yourself, what else did they know? As the air cools around you, your thoughts drift to the quiet rows of soldiers above. They are the first line, the outer guardians, but they're also the warning signs. If the army faces outward, what do they fear coming in? And if they face inward, what are they trying to keep in? You feel a sudden urge to step away from the burial mound just a few paces, not out of panic, but respect, instinct, because somewhere buried deeper than scholars dare to dig is a room waiting to exhale. And maybe, just maybe, it's best if it never does. You walk away from the trap zone, but it doesn't walk away from you. The notion of a tomb laced with deadly mechanisms, flooded with mercury rivers, and crowned by a glittering sky has lodged in your mind like a pebble in a sandal, small but impossible to ignore. And yet Qin Shi Huang didn't build this world of death alone. No emperor does anything alone. He had builders, scholars, spies, and perhaps most fascinating of all, alchemists. Imagine this. It's late at night in 212 BCE. You're not in the tomb, but in the palace compound. Braziers crackle in the courtyard in a sealed laboratory of lacquered wood and jade-tiled roof. You see strange shapes flickering in torchlight. Tables are crowded with vials, stones, powders, and scrolls. The air is heavy with the scent of sulfur and something oddly sweet cinnabar. This is not superstition. This is science, or at least it was at the time. Cinnabar, the brilliant red ore of mercury sulfide, was treasured by early Chinese alchemists. When heated, it transforms into liquid mercury, and when consumed in small doses, oh yes, they did that, it was believed to prolong life, even grant immortality. To modern ears, it sounds mad. But then again, people once swallowed gold to become gods. The mainstream historical record confirms the emperor routinely ingested mercury-based elixirs. His court alchemists crafted potions in secret, some with over 100 ingredients: herbs, animal bones, jade dust, and mercury. The irony. These tonics, meant to stave off death, almost certainly hastened it. Many scholars believe mercury poisoning is what killed him. But here's where things get more peculiar. Archaeologists found strange ceramic vessels near the burial complex. Small, sealed, marked with symbols no one's fully deciphered. Inside some of them, residues of mercury cinnabar and unfamiliar plant compounds. Not typical storage. These were ritual vials. You crouch before one of the replicas on display, tracing the spiral symbol etched on its base. A fringe theory still whispered among certain researchers suggests these vials were not for the emperor at all, but for his tomb. Imagine the alchemists standing in the nearly completed burial chamber, pouring thick mercury into stone channels like priests anointing a temple, not merely creating rivers, but breathing life into the palace of the dead. Now recall Lani the Navigator. From our older tales, she would say that every material has a spirit, that pouring mercury through a chamber isn't just chemistry, it's invocation. You pause for a moment and imagine the sound slow metallic ripples against stone, the hiss of vapor, the flick of firelight bouncing off mirrored streams. If this was a ritual, it was the most elaborate ever staged. And the audience, not people, the afterlife itself. Alchemists were revered in the Qin court, not just as potion makers, but as guides between worlds. They kept detailed records of celestial events, believing the movement of stars governed the fate of emperors. In fact, the tomb's orientation aligns roughly with ancient astronomical principles. The main axis runs north to south, just like the emperor's capital city above. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some alchemical texts suggest the emperor was advised to carry jade slivers in his mouth when buried to preserve the body's qi and prevent decay. A few rare graves from the same period have been found with jade plugs in the mouth, nose, and ears. Jade was thought to block evil spirits and spiritual leakage. Historians still argue whether Qin Shi Huang's body followed this same ritual. No one's seen it. The central chamber has never been opened. No one even knows for certain where within the burial mound his coffin lies, but that doesn't stop people from imagining. You move into a darker corridor of the museum now. The walls are painted with artistic interpretations, soft speculative murals. One shows robed figures encircling a platform. Above them, a dome studded with gemstones forms a glimmering night sky. At the center, the emperor stands arms outstretched, bathed in a mist of rising mercury vapor. Is it history or myth? You glance at the placard beside the mural. It references the classic of mountains and seas, an ancient text filled with monsters, immortals, and strange geography. Some passages describe palaces made entirely of metal and tombs where stars are trapped underground. A few fringe researchers wonder aloud, did Qin Shi Huang model his afterlife not on real cities, but on stories? Now pause with me. Imagine being a court alchemist again. You've worked for years creating potions and spells. You've heard the emperor cough more often. You've seen his lips pale. You know the end is near, but the night before his death, he calls you in. He asks not for medicine, but for instructions. Tell me what to expect, he whispers, when I cross. And what do you say? Do you lie and promise light and glory? Or do you tell the truth, that no one knows, that even gods tremble before the unknown? You look at the mural one more time. It's quiet in here, almost reverent. The air smells faintly of stone and sandalwood, and for a fleeting moment, you feel what the alchemists must have felt awe, not just of death, but of the man who tried to outwit it. You exit back into the fading sunlight, the scent of cinnabar lingering in your mind like a forgotten dream. The burial mound looms once again, and it doesn't feel any closer to surrender. Whatever was poured into that chamber, mercury jade incantations, it wasn't just for preservation. It was for protection, or perhaps for containment. The sun has nearly dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the quiet plains of Xi'an. The burial mound ahead no longer looks like a hill. It looks like a warning, a sealed thought, a sentence with no punctuation. As you draw closer, the air grows cooler, stiller. There are no tourists here, no cameras, just the hush of tall grass swaying and a distant bird calling once, then falling silent. You pause at the base of the mound. There's no sign, no obvious entrance. Just soft earth packed centuries ago by hands long gone. And it's here that you begin to hear it again. The phrase murmured by caretakers and scholars alike. The tomb must never be opened. And perhaps you've been wondering why exactly. You might assume it's about structural integrity, or environmental risk, or even bureaucratic delay. But for those who work closest to the tomb, the reason is simpler and far stranger. They believe the tomb is cursed. Yes, a curse. Now, before you roll your eyes or drift too comfortably into sleep, consider this. The word curse may conjure images of skeletons and mummies and campfire tales. But in ancient China, curses were woven into official rituals. Not dramatic things shouted into the wind, but carefully inked warnings embedded into the very foundation of sacred spaces. In some royal tombs across the region, archaeologists have discovered spirit scripts etched into bricks or buried under doorways. They're not threats. They're instructions, warnings, prayers. One such phrase, discovered in a Han Dynasty tomb, disturb not the eternal chamber, lest the world fall out of balance. Mainstream scholars tend to catalog these as religious customs or ceremonial gestures, not literal booby traps. But others argue that Qin Shi Huang took these sentiments seriously. very seriously. In the records of the grand historian Sima Qian writes that the artisans who knew the secrets of the tomb were sealed inside it once their work was done. No farewells, no monuments, just silence. You take a step back from the mound and try to imagine that final day. A corridor lit with oil lamps, workers filing out of the burial chamber, tools in hand. Their leader nods once and then turns around. The stone door lowers, dust rises, and no one breathes a word. Some call it cruelty, others call it protocol. The emperor couldn't risk his secrets getting out. Now, centuries later, you wonder what those sealed artisans saw, what they built, and whether something still lingers beneath that sealed stone. In recent decades, rumors have resurfaced. A few local workers claimed their compasses spun wildly when held near certain stones at the tomb's base. Others said they felt dizzy or short of breath when walking too close to unmarked slabs. Environmentalists might blame underground gases. Engineers might cite magnetic fields. But for some, these are the tomb's quiet defenses, subtle ways of saying, not yet, not you. You sit now on a stone ledge, running your fingers along its edge. The wind picks up gently, brushing your hair back, and you think of the most chilling part. It isn't that the tomb remains sealed, it's that no one is trying very hard to open it. Oh, there have been proposals, technological plans, robotic probes, controlled entry chambers, but none have moved forward. Not seriously, not with urgency. And it's not just the fear of damaging history, it's the fear of what might happen after. You remember a story from your guide, A Quiet Man Rarely Moved. He once told you about a visiting researcher from overseas. A brilliant mind, meticulous, curious. She came, stayed for weeks, and spent long hours near the trench edges, sketching layouts and taking measurements. One night, after walking alone along the perimeter of the burial mound, she returned pale. She didn't sleep. She packed her belongings the next morning and left without speaking to anyone. Before she departed, she left a note in her room. It read simply, "Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some are meant to stay locked, so something else stays asleep." Of course, it could have been nerves, fatigue, the weight of long days. But something about that story has stayed with you. It nestles in your mind like one of the emperor's silent soldiers just watching. Now shift your thoughts slightly. Let's look at something stranger still. Not far from the mound, archaeologists uncovered shards of black glazed pottery, distinctive, elegant, decorated with abstract waves and flame-like patterns. Some pieces bore inverted seals, a rare marking system only found on ritual vessels. One theory suggests these pieces were used during a final rite, a last offering ceremony conducted just before the tomb was sealed. What's odd is that the seal patterns don't match any known royal lineage. Not Qin, not Zhou, not even mythic dynasties. It's almost as if the final ceremony wasn't just for burial, but for binding. Sealing something older, stranger. Historians still argue whether these artifacts indicate a pre-Qin belief system influencing the tomb's design. A belief, perhaps, that the afterlife needed to be not only accessed, but contained. You stand now, dusting your hands. The shadows have grown long, and the burial mound looms behind you like a closed eye. You feel the pressure of it, not physical, but emotional, like someone asking you politely but firmly to step away. So you do. As you walk back toward the outer fields, you look once more over your shoulder. You don't see movement. You don't hear anything. But you sense the patience of the place, the deliberate stillness, the chosen silence. And you wonder, is the curse real? Or is it simply the human mind sensing what words cannot express? In the end, it doesn't matter, because something about this tomb makes even the bravest archaeologists slow their hands, makes drones hesitate to fly, makes shovels pause mid-air, and perhaps that's all the proof you need. You step softly through the dry grass, the tomb to your back, the weight of its silence still pressing between your shoulder blades. But curiosity is a strange force. It can pull you backward even as your feet move forward. And tonight, that pull leads you toward another part of the Emperor's vision, something dazzling, bizarre, and unsettling all at once. You're heading toward the cosmos, not the night sky above you, but the one buried deep beneath the earth, crafted from stone, metal, and gem. A celestial map locked within a chamber that no one alive has seen. Ancient texts describe the Emperor's burial chamber as a replica of the heavens. The ceiling was said to be embedded with pearls to represent the stars. Mercury rivers flowed below, forming a mirrored map of the empire's waterways. The coffin sat at the heart beneath the firmament above the poisoned seas. It was not just a tomb, it was the universe rendered in miniature. You picture the scene now, with your own soft steps echoing through darkness. The chamber is lit only by the imagined glint of pearl constellations. They do not twinkle, they watch. Below, the channels of Mercury reflect distorted skies. You can't tell where above ends and below begins. It's an entire world, without breath. Here's the widely accepted fact. Sima Qian, writing about a century after the emperor's death, described this very vision. He called it a palace underground, as magnificent as the heavens above, complete with flowing mercury to simulate rivers and booby traps hidden in the walls. Most scholars treat it as a poetic metaphor, an exaggeration. But remember those mercury traces found in the soil, not just elevated, but concentrated, dangerous, suspiciously aligned with ancient descriptions. It gives you pause. Historians still argue whether the entire tomb complex was designed as a cosmological machine, something that would bind the emperor's soul to the rhythms of heaven. A few fringe thinkers take this further. They suggest the tomb might have been built to function not just symbolically but mechanically, that gears and channels and perhaps even forms of ancient hydraulics were used to move the mercury, to animate the rivers. You scoff. But then, you remember those corrosion-resistant weapons, the precise layouts, the thousands of individualized sculptures. If Qin Shi Huang had access to unknown methods, wouldn't his final chamber be the crown jewel? Here's something odd. A rare jade disc found near the outer edges of the burial zone is carved with concentric circles and dots. At first glance, it seems decorative, but a graduate student from Beijing once noted that the pattern closely resembles an ancient star chart and that the disc's dots align with the positions of known celestial bodies during the spring equinox of 210 BCE, the year of the emperor's death. Coincidence, perhaps, but it's enough to make your next breath hitch in your chest. Imagine being one of the emperor's astrologers summoned to sketch the heavens for burial. You're told to forget the living world and instead map a sky that will never move. Not just for decor, but for navigation, so the emperor's soul can find its way in the afterlife. And now imagine you get it wrong, that every misplaced pearl, every poorly measured arc might doom his spirit to wander lost between stars, unable to return. That's a burden too heavy for any scribe. Now, in this quiet moment, you look up at the real night sky. The stars above Xi'an are faint but visible. They are not sharp. They shimmer through a haze of dust and city light. You wonder if the emperor in his final breath looked at this same sky. And if so, did he trust it? Or did he already believe his real sky was waiting below? You move now, past the museum's lesser-known wing, a space dedicated to celestial archaeology. A replica model of the tomb's ceiling has been crafted here, black lacquer above tiny gemstone beads fitted with precision to mimic constellations. You try to find one. You know, Orion Ursa, Major, but they don't quite match. These are not Greek stars. They're older. Chinese constellations are grouped by different logic. The azure dragon of the east, the black tortoise of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, and the white tiger of the west. The emperor would have known these symbols intimately. His court believed they guarded the four corners of the heavens. He would have ensured their placement overhead an eternal ceiling under their watchful gaze. Some scholars suggest that the emperor saw himself not merely as a ruler, but as the pivot, the axis around which heaven and earth turned. The tomb then becomes more than a resting place. It becomes a cosmic instrument, and perhaps that's why it remains closed. If the chamber is not just symbolic but functional disturbing, it could unbalance something deeper, something we don't yet understand. You lean against a wall and close your eyes just for a moment. In your mind, you walk through that imagined chamber. The pearl stars above you pulse faintly. The mercury rivers hum below. There is no sound but your own heartbeat. You step forward, and your foot touches nothing, because you're floating. Not falling, not rising. Just unanchored. You open your eyes. The display model is still, but your heart isn't. Let's break the silence with one question. What if the tomb isn't silent because no one dares disturb it? What if it's silent because something inside is still listening? In old Chinese traditions, the soul had multiple parts. One rose to the heavens. One stayed near the body. One could wander. Perhaps the emperor hoped to unify all three, trap them in one sacred place where they could never be separated. And so beneath the earth, the stars were caught, the rivers were forged, and the cosmos was folded in on itself, forming a shell to house a single man's legacy. That shell still stands, and no one has dared crack it, not because we can't, but because we're afraid of what might unfold. The light outside has shifted to twilight, now neither day nor night. It's the hour when things long hidden start to hum faintly beneath the noise of the world. And as you continue your slow, deliberate steps, your mind circles back to the emperor's strange empire under the soil. It's not just soldiers and rivers and stars. No, something far more puzzling lies buried among those statues and corridors. Artifacts that shouldn't exist. You follow a narrow path that leads away from the terracotta ranks, past displays of broken wheels, bronze armor fragments, and half-buried pottery. And then you see it, a bronze bird perched on a pedestal. Its wings are jointed like an insect's, delicate, hinged, not rigid like most funerary sculptures. And here's the unsettling part. It's aerodynamic. This isn't the image of a bird. It's a design. Scholars have tested replicas in wind tunnels. The strange little artifact glides unnervingly well, its tail perfectly balanced for lift. The real one, retrieved from a lesser tomb nearby, is estimated to be over 2,000 years old, and it's not alone. You move on and find another oddity. A pair of wheels and an axle, much like a toy, but with an axle that shows signs of suspension-style movement. Not solid wood, but flexible material long since decayed. Some believe it was part of a child's cart. Others believe it was a scaled model for something larger, something meant to move smoother faster. You touch the glass case. This doesn't feel like ancient art. It feels like engineering. Here's the mainstream. Take The Qin dynasty was not just militarily powerful, it was technically sophisticated. They standardized weights, measures, coinage, and even axle widths to ensure smoother cart traffic on roads. Their artisans were capable of astounding craftsmanship. But here's the quirky angle. Some of these artifacts appear too advanced for what we understand of the time. A bronze dagger recovered in the 1970s was so sharp and uncorroded that archaeologists assumed it was a modern intrusion. Testing revealed it was original. Its blade was coated in chromium oxide, a technique used today in stainless steel manufacturing, but not known to exist in ancient China. How did they do it? Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate metallurgical innovation or a coincidence of burial conditions. But if it was deliberate, what else might they have known? You walk further into a side room not often visited. Inside is a half-reconstructed chariot. Its frame is delicate, its bronze fittings engraved with symbols. The wheels are not flat but slightly curved, engineered perhaps for better terrain control. Nearby are the skeletal remains of horses, stone recreations of the originals, carved in motion, eyes, wide mouths open. The horses are beautiful, but one has metal fittings in its hooves, like horseshoes, but not nailed. Slipped on, secured. You blink. Even the guidebooks hesitate on this one. Some call them decorative metal adornments. Others suggest they were experiments. A few even propose they served magical purposes imbued with jade dust to protect the animals from harm. You chuckle softly, imagining a royal stable hand trying to slip a bronze sleeve onto a live horse's foot while it snorts impatiently. But still you wonder, if these were prototypes, if these were attempts at engineering wonders that didn't yet exist, what were they practicing for? Now pause with me. Imagine you're a young boy in the court of Qin Shi Huang. Your uncle works in the imperial workshops. One night, you sneak into the bronze foundry. You see lanterns casting wild shadows. You see artisans hammering gears, shaping tubes, carving moving parts. They're not building statues. They're experimenting. And then one of them sees you. He doesn't scold. He kneels. He places something in your hand, a flat disc with tiny notches, like a coin, but thicker. He presses it into your palm and whispers, "This," it turns something inside. He never explains what. You remember it for the rest of your life. There's a legend whispered among certain researchers that Qin Shi Huang commissioned a mechanical model of his empire. Not a map, not a painting, but a kinetic model, moving rivers of mercury, tiny jade palaces' wheels that turned at the pull of a lever. If it ever existed, it's likely entombed beneath the burial mound. Imagine it. A miniature kingdom that functioned. A world inside a world. A few academics scoff. They say the technology wasn't there. But then you remember the dagger, the flying bird, the strange axle. Were they fragments of a lost invention? Or just mistakes from a mind trying to outpace time? You pause now beside a reconstructed storage vault sealed behind glass. Inside are dozens of small statues, not soldiers, but servants. Some hold trays. Some kneel. One has its mouth open mid-song. They were not made to fight. They were made to serve. One figure, a crouched scribe, holds a stylus and scroll. You lean closer. On the scroll, there's no writing, just small indentations. Too uniform for random decoration, too precise to be meaningless. A fringe theory claims it's a form of code, not writing, but instructions. What if the scroll wasn't a message for the living? What if it was meant for something inside the tomb to read? Now your breath catches, because the thought creeps in, softly, gently. What if the tomb isn't just filled with dead things? What if something was made to wake up? And maybe, just maybe, that's why we haven't gone further. Not because we can't, but because we're afraid to see what starts moving when the air gets in. You step back into the night. The stars are clearer now. You wonder if Qin Shi Huang's mechanical sky still twinkles below your feet. You wonder if the rivers still flow. And you wonder what else deep in that forbidden place is still waiting to begin. You walk slowly, now the moon casting a silvery sheen across the plain. The wind picks up just enough to rustle your sleeves, as if brushing against you with unseen fingers. You pass the pits, the restored galleries, the forgotten tools. You pass the watch posts, the low stone walls, and finally come to a place most visitors never see. There's no sign, no gate, just a narrow trench half filled with weeds and a faint echo beneath your boots. This is the path of the vanished, not the army, not the chariots, but the workers. The men and women who gave their lives willingly or otherwise to craft the emperor's vision, who hauled stone-baked clay, forged bronze-painted armor, and some say whispered curses into the walls when no one was looking. You stop beside a mound of broken tiles. One piece catches your eye, a thumbprint pressed hastily into wet clay. Not a signature, just a moment, a breath held forever. And then you remember the story, one every guide in Xi'an tells, always with a shrug, always with a glance over the shoulder. The tomb closed behind its makers. You sit on a stone ledge and let that line unfurl inside you. The claim appears in Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, written around a century after the tomb was sealed. It says that once the burial was complete, once the emperor was laid to rest, the artisans who knew the inner workings, the traps, the chambers, the secrets were entombed with him. Not ceremonially, literally alive. It's a chilling thought, but in a way, it makes sense. This wasn't a monument, it was a machine, and machines with secrets must protect themselves. The workers in the emperor's eyes were as essential as the gears they'd built, and just as disposable. Mainstream historians treat this story cautiously. No physical evidence of these entombed builders has been uncovered. No mass graves, no skeletons locked in passageways. But the silence itself, the lack of evidence, is what makes it all the more eerie. Because, here's the thing, entire sections of the complex remain untouched, not unexplored, untouchable. There are areas archaeologists have mapped from above, corridors, sealed rooms, deep shafts that lie beneath layers of packed earth. They know these spaces are there, but they refuse to dig, not out of superstition, out of respect. That's what they'll say. But the word catches, doesn't it? Because respect feels like a placeholder for something else, something more like dread. You glance up at the burial mound, now a black silhouette against the star-pocked sky, and suddenly the word sealed feels wrong. It wasn't just closed, it was locked. And no one has the key, not even the most determined scholar. A small museum guidebook flutters in your hand. Inside, there's a short section titled The Hidden Dead. It mentions pottery shards found near a back corridor, each marked with numbers and odd repeated glyphs. Some archaeologists believe these were inventory markers used by workers to log their tasks as they went. Each number corresponds to a construction phase: pit, chamber, roof. But what's strange is this: the numbers stop suddenly, abruptly, as if someone dropped the system mid-use or was silenced. And what about the last entries? Those glyphs don't match the rest. One researcher compared them to ancient protective talismans, not curses, not threats, pleadings. Imagine that now. You're one of the workers, locked in with a few others. The tomb is sealed. The last stone falls into place. The sound vanishes. You're in complete blackness. You have a lantern. For now. Do you cry? Do you scream? Or do you begin carving symbols into the walls, fast, desperate, hoping that some future hand will see them and understand? There's a wall fragment on display in a smaller building nearby. It's scorched, not fire-scorched chemical. The stone has fine pockmarks etched by something corrosive. Mercury vapor acid. No one's sure, but it wasn't part of any trap. It was behind a door. What was happening in there? Did someone try to break out? Or worse, did something try to follow them in? Let's drift to something lighter for a moment, because even this tomb needs pauses. Picture a worker, young, newly assigned. His name is Li. He's just learned how to press clay into molds. One day, he gets distracted and molds a tiny animal, his family's dog, just for fun. He hides it among the tiles behind a support beam. Decades pass. The tomb seals. 2,000 years later, a researcher finds a strange lump inside a cracked beam. It's that dog, perfectly preserved. A blink of humanity in the vast machinery of death. Little stories like that dot the excavation report's small moments where the workers tried to leave something behind. Not rebellion, just memory. One statue, believed to be of a low-ranking officer, has a bandage carved into his foot. Another holds a scroll, though no others in his group do. Was it a mistake, an inside joke, a plea? Historians still argue whether these details were deliberate expressions or just quirks of tired hands and rushed deadlines. But to you, they feel like voices, quiet ones, pressed into clay before the dark closed in. As you rise and brush the dirt from your legs, you feel a strange presence, not watching exactly, more like remembering. The tomb has held its silence for over 2 millennia. And maybe part of that silence belongs to the workers too, not just what they built, but what they became. The seal of the emperor's tomb wasn't just physical. It was made of sweat, fear, devotion, and an agreement no one ever dared put into words. You may bury us, but remember us. And tonight, you do. The night deepens around you. The stars are clearer now, piercing the sky with quiet certainty. But your gaze drifts elsewhere to the past, to whispers, to traces half heard and barely understood. Because here's something strange. Amid all the bronze swords and stone horses among the workers and warriors, there's something missing. The voice of the emperor. You'd think a ruler so obsessed with control, legacy, and immortality would have left behind speeches, inscriptions, declarations, words carved into tablets, etched in metal, engraved on walls. But there's very little. A few scattered proclamations, mostly bureaucratic. A handful of standardized characters he imposed during his linguistic reforms. But no grand eulogy, no final message, no tomb inscription that reads, "Here lies the first emperor." Instead, silence. But stories persist. Stories that something was left behind. Just not for everyone. One tale begins in a minor Qin-era village nestled by the Wei River. An elderly potter once told researchers about a legend passed down through his family. It spoke of a bronze tube hidden in the tomb, a cylinder no longer than a man's forearm, with grooves running its length like the rings of a tree. According to the story, the emperor's final words were etched inside that tube. Not as writing, but as sound, not to be read, to be played. You stop walking now. That notion lingers. Could such a thing even exist? Mainstream scholars roll their eyes. The idea of a bronze voice recorder is fantasy. Bronze can't hold sound. And yet, ancient China was no stranger to acoustic ingenuity. Musical stones, resonant bells, water clocks calibrated by sound. And consider this. Archaeologists uncovered a massive set of bronze chimes in a royal tomb from the earlier Zhou dynasty, over 400 years old. Each chime was cast with perfect thickness to produce two distinct pitches depending on where it was struck. They understood harmonics. They understood vibration. So what if someone during Qin Shi Huang's reign tried to go further? One theory long buried in a dusty academic journal speculates that a voice tube might have used notches and grooves like a rudimentary phonograph drum, rotated and played by a mechanism we've never found meant to reproduce the emperor's voice in death. Absurd, maybe, but not impossible. You imagine now, deep in the chamber, lit by oil lamps and burning incense, a group of artisans lower a bronze cylinder into a carved recess. They close the lid. They bow. One whispers, "When he returns, let his words guide him." And now, that cylinder waits, still unheard. Another story comes from a lesser-known excavation record. In the 1990s, a team uncovered a chamber that had partially collapsed near the tomb perimeter. Inside were burned scroll fragments, paper silk, and bamboo. Most had disintegrated, but one charred shard bore a curious set of pictographs. It translated roughly to, "The breath is sealed, the voice is kept, until the sky breaks." Cryptic, poetic, prophetic. Historians still argue whether this was part of a funerary chant or a reference to something mechanical, breath perhaps being vapor or pressure, voice being literal sound. You step into a museum alcove now where a model of an ancient Qin-era sound vessel sits in a glass case. It's small, plain, but tap it gently and it sings a pure, haunting tone. Some believe these vessels were placed in tombs to create harmonics when disturbed. A sort of sonic alarm, not loud, just unsettling. Imagine walking through the dark, brushing against one, and hearing it hum softly. A warning, a memory. You lean closer to the display. A placard reads, "It is unknown whether the first emperor's tomb includes acoustic elements. No sound has emerged, and yet visitors often report a feeling like something wants to speak." You exhale. Here's another curious fact. Qin Shi Huang's name appears only sparingly in the very records that chronicle his reign. Many simply refer to him as the emperor or the first sovereign. This wasn't an accident. He outlawed the mention of earlier rulers. He wanted to be the start of time. And perhaps he believed his voice, if kept, if preserved, would continue to shape the world long after his breath had stopped. Not just a speech, not even a memory, but command. A few speculative historians claim there was once an entire chamber, now sealed, that held no statues, no treasures, just sound makers. Gongs, bells, bronze tubes, wind chimes of carved jade. And at the center, a sealed pedestal with a locked mechanism known only to the emperor's final chamberlain. If it's real, it remains unopened, unheard. You step back into the night ears, attuned to every creak of bamboo, every breath of wind. And now, every faint rustle seems almost intentional, because maybe the emperor's voice does remain, not in words, but in silence too deep to touch, not in memory, but in resonance. Waiting, you pause. Imagine you had the key, just for a moment. Would you turn it? Would you let him speak again? And if you did, would he say thank you? Or would he say close the door? You move quietly now. Not because anyone demands it, but because the deeper you venture into this invisible story, the more you feel the weight of something watching, not with eyes, but with memory. The Terracotta Army, the river of mercury, the mechanical birds, the vanished workers, and now a silence too deliberate to be natural. But of course, you're not the only one who's wanted to know. Others have come, outsiders, scientists, diplomats, curators, teams armed with seismic equipment, robotic crawlers, chemical sensors, and polite letters, all with one goal: to get in, and none have succeeded. You arrive at the edge of the site's modern boundary, marked by a modest guard post and a thin rope fence. On the other side lies a less maintained stretch of earth, untouched, reserved. Beyond it, the mound rises in the distance, backlit now by moonlight. A dragon's back under starlight. This is where the modern eyes have tried and been denied. The first major attempt came in the late 1980s. A coalition of archaeologists proposed drilling a narrow shaft into the central mound, barely the width of a soda can, intended to lower a camera into what they hoped was the emperor's main chamber. Permission was never granted. Why? The official reasons were preservation, contamination risk, and political complexity. But you ask the man who's been sweeping dust from a nearby step for years, and he'll say, "Some things do not want to be filmed." You smile. But you still wonder. In 2006, a more ambitious project was proposed by a German-Chinese joint team, a non-invasive scanning initiative using cosmic ray muon detectors, tiny particles from space that can create internal 3D images of sealed chambers. It's the same method used to discover hidden rooms inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Initial surveys showed irregularities, cavities beneath the mound, but results were inconclusive. The project stalled. Then in 2011, a drone was tested near the site, not to enter, but to map from above. It malfunctioned mid-air and fell into a field. The footage recovered was scrambled, distorted. Engineers blamed interference. Locals simply said it didn't want to be seen. Now those stories might sound theatrical, but they have one thing in common: no attempt to breach the central mound has been completed. Imagine that. All the technology of the modern world, and yet a 2,000-year-old tomb still wins. You glance through a file of restricted proposals. One team wanted to use fiber optics. Another proposed a pressurized protective dome around the entire mound to simulate controlled excavation. Another offered cryogenic stabilization of interior gases before any soil was disturbed. None were accepted. It's not just Chinese officials who hesitate. Even foreign institutions have issued quiet warnings. In 2015, a university in Europe conducted a simulation based on ancient descriptions of the tomb's layout and potential contents. Their AI model suggested a high likelihood of toxic exposure, not just from mercury, but from arsenic residues used in Qin-era pigment preservation. They withdrew their support within weeks. Historians still argue whether this was scientific caution or political theater. But among insiders, there's a nickname for the tomb: the door that blinks. You ask why? One conservator shrugs. Because every few years someone gets close. Then the door blinks, and they step back. You walk past a wall covered in faded clippings, articles, reports, obituaries. Names of scholars who spent decades studying the site, all of them. Brilliant, most of them careful. One man in particular stands out: Dr. Elias Rotfeld, a Swiss sinologist with a specialty in early Chinese engineering. He visited the tomb site 6 times over 15 years. His final paper, published posthumously, was titled "The Emperor's Negative Space." It was a strange document. He argued that the true message of the tomb was not in what was built, but in what was left inaccessible. That the act of not opening the tomb is itself the last surviving command of the first emperor. To disturb it, he wrote, is to disobey his final law. Dr. Rotfeld died in his sleep, age 72. Just 1 year before a new excavation team was assembled, the team disbanded without explanation. You sit now on a low stone step and breathe in slowly. It smells like dust, like soil, like rusted bronze. But underneath that, something faintly floral, like pressed chrysanthemums. You're not sure where it comes from. And suddenly, The mound in the distance doesn't look like a tomb anymore. It looks like a monument to patience, or a riddle wrapped in repetition. Each time, someone has come to unlock the secret, they've been slowed, stalled. Not violently, just gently turned away, like a hand resting on a shoulder, saying, "Not yet." You look up at the moon. It shines down, like it always has, over dynasties and debates, over failed drills and sealed chambers. And still, the emperor sleeps, or rules, or waits. Maybe he never intended to be awoken. Maybe he expected only this, that people would try, that trying would become its own ritual. A dance around the sealed door, a dance where no one gets in, but everyone changes. And maybe that's the point. You close your eyes for a moment and hear it, not a sound exactly, but a feeling, like a drumbeat beneath your feet. Steady, cautious, timeless. The tomb remains unopened. And somehow, you understand now, that is not a failure. It is a choice. You walk now with more care than before, as though each step might echo backward through time. The wind is quieter. The stars are out in full, and the burial mound looms behind you like an unfinished sentence, still sealed, still whole. But if you've learned anything by now, it's that the silence itself tells a story. You follow a winding path toward the western edge of the complex, an area rarely included in tourist maps or guided tours. There, in a structure resembling a scholar's pavilion, lives the memory of a man whose ideas have become legend. He is often referred to simply as the last scholar. His name was Wen Horan, a quiet, patient archaeologist who spent over 40 years studying the Qin tomb without ever laying a hand on it. He called the mound his mountain of mirrors, a place that reflected not just the emperor's will, but the fears and desires of every generation that approached it. Wen Horan never asked to excavate. He only asked to listen. You sit now in a replica of his study. Papers are pinned across wooden boards covered in careful calligraphy and tiny diagrams. Ink brushes lie neatly beside notes about mercury levels, air pressure, symbolic motifs, and something unusual, spatial silence. He believed the emperor's tomb was designed to muffle the world, to create an environment where nothing from outside could cross its threshold. No sound, no breath, no time. And his theory that opening the tomb wouldn't release a curse. It would break a promise. According to Horan, the design of the tomb wasn't about preservation. It was about containment. Not of a monster, he wrote, not of treasure, but of a king's most dangerous desire, the belief that he could remain in control even after death. You run your finger gently across one of his diagrams. It shows not just the central chamber, but concentric barriers, zones of influence, each embedded with meaning. A ring of warriors, a ring of rivers, a ring of traps, a ring of silence. At the center, a symbol that looks like an eye. Wen Horan argued that the emperor didn't see death as an ending, but as a transition of state, not physical, but authorial. The idea that if he could lock his image, his voice, his symbols, and his secrecy in place, he could continue to shape the world forever. And perhaps that's why the tomb is so hard to open, not because of politics or technology, but because it isn't supposed to be opened until the world is ready to no longer be shaped by him. You take a moment to imagine that. What if the emperor's presence, his refusal to decay, to speak, to release, creates a kind of historical gravity, one that subtly bends the will of every generation that approaches him? And what if breaking that seal would reset something? No one's dared to test it. You flip to another page in the scholar's notes and find a curious passage. It's part observation, part poetry. His army faces east toward the rising. But the dead do not rise. They only wait. And if the door ever swings open, let it be not with a crowbar, but with a question. You wonder now what that question would be. Would it be, "Who are you?" or something simpler? Are you still trying to rule? You glance around the study replica. There are photos pinned along one beam, images of celestial maps, ancient burial texts, cross-sections of imperial vaults. But in the corner, framed in humble pine wood, is a drawing done in a child's hand, a burial mound, and underneath it, in shaky brushstrokes, "Don't open." He's thinking. You smile, even as something in your chest tightens. It's easy to view the emperor as a tyrant, a paranoid despot, a man obsessed with his own immortality. But what if beneath all that was a deep and terrible loneliness? What if the tomb isn't just a monument to power, but a prison of self? You picture him now, deep beneath the mound, seated in silence. Not asleep, not dead, just waiting, not for resurrection, not even for worship, but for someone to understand that power doesn't end at the edge of the grave. It echoes, it stains, it lingers, and the question is, who decides when that echo should stop? You rise slowly and step outside. The burial mound is still there, silent, solid, unbroken. But now, it looks different, not like a secret, but like a decision, one that's been made and remade by every scholar, every caretaker, every generation that has stood where you are now. Each choosing to look and not to touch, because deep down, they understand something Wen Horan put into words better than anyone. The tomb is not closed because it is sacred. It is closed because it still believes it is in charge. You turn away now, not out of fear, not out of reverence, but out of something simpler, acceptance. The Emperor's world remains intact, not because we lack the means to enter it, but because we still live in the shadow of what he built. And maybe we always will. You walk slowly, almost ceremonially, now retracing your steps toward the main trenches, past the statues and stones and soot-colored soil. The hour is late, but time feels irrelevant. Everything about this place, its scale, its stillness, its strangeness, shrinks the ticking of any clock into a whisper. Your feet eventually bring you near the edge of the burial mound once more. You can't help but stare. You've heard the stories. You've imagined the voices, the traps, the rivers, the sky. But now, you start to wonder about what lies directly beneath the highest point. Because even though the mound stretches like a dome across several acres, everyone agrees that the deepest point remains untouched, the throne room. They call it beneath the forbidden ceiling. Let's imagine it now, because that's the only way we've ever truly approached it. You pass through layers of clay, of compacted loess, of stone and sealant. You descend through chambers meant to distract, to delay, to confuse. And then far below the surface, the earth opens into a chamber so wide, it breathes like lungs in darkness. The ceiling arches above you, studded with polished stones and pearls, representing constellations no longer visible in the sky. Below the floor reflects that sky, not in still water, but in mercury, flowing, circling, forever moving in narrow channels carved to match the empire's rivers, obeying a system of pressure and heat that's long since gone cold. And in the middle of this mirrored lake stands a platform, and on that platform the throne, black, lacquered, untouched by time. Not just a chair, a claim. Now you pause. Ask yourself, who dares to sit upon it? Because no one has seen it. No drone has entered. No camera has scanned. The chamber remains theoretical, hypothetical, and yet it's one of the most obsessively studied spaces in the world. A few scholars have tried to model it digitally, feeding ancient texts and modern measurements into programs that simulate light airflow echo temperature. They say the shape of the ceiling would cause any sound to amplify upward, not outward. that voices in the throne room would sound huge to the heavens, but almost inaudible to anyone nearby. That's when you begin to feel it not as noise, but as weight. The silence here isn't just the absence of sound, it's pressure. Imagine being inside that room. You whisper. The ceiling hears you. The walls absorb you. The mercury flows like breath. One theory suggests the chamber was never meant to be entered after burial, that it was sealed not to keep us out, but to keep the emperor in, not his body, his authority. Because, think about it, if you believed, your rule extended beyond death. If you truly believed, the universe could be replicated in metal and gem and fire, why stop ruling just because your lungs stopped moving? What if your laws were inscribed not in stone, but in design, in order, in stillness? Some believe that the throne chamber was rigged to collapse if disturbed. Others believe it was designed to activate, not with violence, with message, a light triggered by oxygen, a voice recorded in bronze, a final proclamation to the living. But then there's the darker theory, that the throne isn't empty, that at its center sits the emperor himself, not a skeleton, not ashes, but a statue made of bronze or gold or jade, not just a likeness, a vessel. And if that statue was meant to contain more than just artistry, if it was meant to contain will, then what happens when it sees daylight? You imagine now, you descend through layers of secrecy. You cross the mercury. You stand before the throne. You shine your flashlight upward, and the figure's eyes glint. You freeze, because even if it's not alive, it has the authority of a living thing. And perhaps that's enough. Remember Lonnie, our navigator, from Another Knight's Tale? She once said, "There are places where power waits, not because it sleeps, but because it listens for permission." You wonder if the Emperor's tomb is one of those places. You back away from the imagined throne room now. You return to the surface. You walk again beneath stars that feel less comforting than they did an hour ago, because now you carry something with you, the awareness that silence can be a signal. One last story. In 2017, a graduate student published a fringe theory. She had analyzed soil samples and found trace elements of manganese and aluminum oddly distributed in a radial pattern. Her hypothesis, that the burial mound may have once had a dome-like structure beneath, possibly metallic, possibly designed to act as a Faraday cage. In other words, a chamber protected from electromagnetic interference, from signals. Historians scoffed, but she posed a haunting question. What if it's not that the tomb doesn't want to be opened? What if it's waiting for the right frequency? You stop walking. You listen. The wind moves through the grass. The stars flicker gently. The mound is quiet, but something somewhere is humming, faint, constant, like a tone you can't quite hear, but can't stop noticing. You smile now, not because you understand, but because maybe, just maybe, understanding isn't what the tomb wants. Maybe it wants patience, or maybe it wants to know who you are before you enter. So for now, you leave the throne room undisturbed, and as you turn away, you almost imagine the statue real or not nodding. Your breath fogs slightly now in the cool night air as you walk, and you begin to notice a shift, not just in the sky, which deepens to the darkest part of blue, but in yourself. You've come a long way. Through pits and pavilions, through stories etched in broken tiles and half-remembered names, through armies of clay rivers of poison and the idea that silence can rule louder than a voice. But now, you come to a strange place. No sign, no markers. Just a cluster of low stones arranged not in a circle or square, but a spiral barely noticeable at first. You might have missed it. Many do, and yet you stop. Because here more than anywhere else, the ground seems to hum, not loudly, but steadily. Like breath, like the turning of an idea too old for words. You sit down on one of the cool stones and think about everything you've seen and everything that's still hidden. You've been above soldiers, beside traps, behind theories, and beneath stars. But now, what if the final secret isn't buried? What if it's in you? Because to spend this long thinking about Qin Shi Huang is to begin to sense the outline of something far older than just ambition. It's the question he asked himself every day of his life. What happens when I'm no longer here? And he answered it not with poetry or farewell, but with engineering, with bronze, with mercury, with silence. And here tonight, you begin to feel the gravity of that answer. Let's be honest, we tend to think of emperors as loud things, trumpets, edicts, armies. But Qin Shi Huang left behind something louder than noise. He left behind delay. Every generation that's come since his death has asked, should we go in? And every generation has heard the same whisper, not yet. Not because they couldn't, but because the tomb still commands. There is a deeper kind of power in getting the world to wait. And now, so do you. You lean back and look up at the stars and remember what the emperor's engineers tried to build below. A sky that didn't move. A world that didn't end. A palace untouched by time. Historians still argue whether the chamber beneath the mound has collapsed or endured. Whether it's filled with treasure or empty space. Whether the emperor lies in state or in dust. But what they agree on, what no one can deny, is this. It's still working. The system he designed this tomb, this silence, has held for over 2 millennia. No breach. No chaos. No cameras flashing across his final gaze. What he wanted, he achieved. And you wonder, if you were in his place, would you do the same? Would you build something so perfect, so private, that it could last longer than your name? And if you did, would you want it opened? Or would you want the world to keep circling endlessly? Asking, endlessly wondering. You smile faintly, because maybe the tomb doesn't want answers. Maybe it wants storytellers. And maybe you were always meant to leave it untouched, not because it's forbidden, but because it is whole, still, complete, not broken, not unlocked, not failed, just waiting. Waiting not for tools or teams or triumph, but for the right question. And now that you've heard all these whispers, all these voices wrapped in clay and mercury and memory, what would you ask? Imagine yourself standing before the sealed door, one hand on the stone, one breath left before you speak. What would you say? Would it be why? Would it be how? Or would it be something gentler, something older? Like, are you lonely? You don't know, but you suspect that door would not answer, not in sound, but in stillness, because stillness is what he chose. Stillness is what remains. And in that he endures. You don't speak as you walk now. You don't need to. The story has gone quiet like the last ripple on a moonlit pond. But in your silence, you begin to notice details you missed before. A faint line in the dirt that curves where it should be straight. A set of stones laid with just enough precision to make you wonder if they mean something. And above it all, the same constant watchful burial mound, unmoving, but somehow always changing in your mind. This is the final place on your path tonight, a ledge overlooking the entire complex. From here, the trenches stretch out like furrows in an ancient field. The warriors stand in their frozen rows. The pavilion roofs reflect the faintest hints of starlight. And beyond it all, the dark mound rises like a slow breath that never exhaled. You sit. You think of the army. You think of the engineers. You think of Lonnie's calm steadiness. Of Koa, nervous but brave. Of Tua, who once called silence a story that hasn't chosen its ending yet. None of them are real. and yet you feel them as guides, as echoes, as company, because that's what stories are, company across time. The emperor built his afterlife in stone, in metal, in secrecy. But tonight, you've walked through a different one built from ideas, images, questions. And now it's time to leave. But not before one final look. You close your eyes and imagine the burial chamber once more. The walls layered with cinnabar and lacquer. The ceiling above gleaming with stars carved from pearl and mica. The floor below shimmering with mercury, slithering in ancient channels like rivers dreaming of the sea. And at the center, a throne, or a sarcophagus, or something else. A question shaped like a man. You approach. You reach out, but your fingers stop just short. Because now you understand. It's not that the tomb can't be opened. It's that the emperor, even in death, still rules. Not through fear, not through force, but through anticipation. Every generation that stands at the edge of his chamber wonders what lies inside, and then backs away, leaving the mystery intact. Not broken, not defeated, respected. You rise from your spot on the ledge. The moon is high now, and the wind is cooler. It carries the scent of earth, of dry grass, of the faintest hint of iron. And somewhere in that wind, just maybe you hear the softest whisper, still here, because the emperor hasn't vanished. He hasn't passed on. He simply waits, not for followers, not for enemies, not for you, but for the only thing he's ever truly feared, time. And so his tomb remains, as he built it, sealed, deliberate, commanding. A world of its own. A world not meant to be inherited, but watched from the outside. A monument not to death, but to control. You take a final breath, look once more at the dark horizon, and you let the story close, not with a bang, not with a dig, not with an answer, but with the hush of understanding. You walk away from the mound lighter than when you arrived. You carry no artifacts, only the weight of wonder. And that perhaps is the emperor's greatest trick of all, because you were never meant to open the tomb. You were only ever meant to imagine it. You walk now, beneath the stars, the night complete around you. The burial mound lies behind you, unchanged, untouched, unbroken. But something inside you has shifted. The air is gentler, the silence deeper. And though you leave with empty hands, your mind is full of paths, walked voices half heard, and a story that somehow keeps unfolding even when no one speaks. Let's walk back through it one last time together. You began tonight with a question. Why have the deepest chambers of the Qin Emperor's tomb never been opened? And you found answers, many of them. Some were whispered in the clay soldiers frozen mid-step, each with a different face, each guarding a dream that was never meant to end. Others lay in chemical traces mercury pooled where rivers once ran the strange gleam of bronze that never rusted. You saw artifacts too advanced for their time chambers that refused to be touched, and theories that reach past reason into myth. You met the alchemists burning cinnabar and whispering to metal. You watched the sculptors press thumbprints into clay, perhaps knowingly crafting eternity. You stood beside modern researchers who have all but begged to open the tomb, only to step back when the silence pressed too close. And in the middle of it all, you walked beside three imagined companions, Koa with his nervous hands and earnest heart, Lonnie, whose steady voice cut through every storm, and Tua the elder, who understood that wisdom is not knowing all the answers, but knowing how long to wait for them. You felt their presence tonight, not because they lived, but because they helped you live inside the story. That's what this has always been, a story. But stories have weight, especially the kind we choose not to end. The emperor himself knew this. Qin Shi Huang ruled not just with armies and decrees, but with an idea that even in death he could govern, that he could bend history around himself like a clay figure in a kiln. that if his tomb were crafted perfectly, if it sang with stars and whispered with poison, then no one would dare undo it. And so far, he was right. Historians still argue whether the traps are real, whether the rivers of mercury ever flowed, whether the ceiling of his chamber truly holds the sky. They debate whether the artisans were sealed in, whether a recording of his voice waits inside, whether the statue on the throne is hollow or whole. But what they don't argue, what they can't, is this: the tomb works. It has held the world in suspense for over 2,000 years. It has kept scholars busy, storytellers, inspired politicians cautious, and archaeologists humble. And you've become part of it too. Because by listening, by imagining, you've entered the one chamber that doesn't need unlocking, the chamber of wonder. That's where the Emperor truly lives now. Not beneath the mound, not behind stone doors, but in every breath held by a visitor who stands at the edge of that grassy rise and dares to ask, what if we did open it? And then dares to answer, but should we? Maybe one day someone will break that seal, carefully, respectfully. Maybe they'll find traps and stars and mercury flowing in perfect spirals. Maybe they'll find only dust. Or maybe they'll find a mirror, and in that mirror, the reflection of a world that never stopped asking who we are when we try to live forever. You exhale now slowly, because this is the lesson that lingers. The Emperor's true monument wasn't clay or bronze or even the tomb itself. It was doubt, the kind that makes us pause, the kind that teaches us patience, the kind that reminds us some things are precious because they remain untouched. And now, dear listener, as you lie back and feel the weight of your blanket, the softness of your pillow, the rhythm of your breath, know this: you've just walked the halls of an empire that exists more in the imagination than in soil. You've journeyed into silence and returned with something rare, a moment of stillness that asks nothing of you except to wonder. So rest now. Let the clay soldiers resume their silent vigil. Let the mercury sleep in its dark rivers. Let the Emperor sit undisturbed, as he has for millennia, watching, waiting, dreaming. And let your thoughts drift like lanterns on an ancient stream, glowing softly with all the mysteries that will never need solving to be loved. Because in the end, that's enough. Thank you truly for joining me through every emotion, every turn, every moment of this journey. It's been an adventure, and I'm grateful to share it with you. As we close this tale, I wish you a peaceful evening. May you have a restful night, deep sleep, and dreams filled with wonder and light. Rest well, you've earned it. And when you're ready for the next story, I'll be here waiting to journey with you again. Before you go, if you love this tale, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what moved you, surprised you, or lingers with you long after the story ends. Until we meet again, good night, and see you in the next adventure.